Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. My name is Felicity Ezewike. Green hydrogen has become an increasingly valuable resource in global energy markets as the pursuit of more sustainable source for a green energy future intensifies. Governments around the world are promoting projects for domestic and export markets, as well as accelerating plans to invest billions of dollars over the next few years in these areas. And for the first time, it seems Africa is on the starting line with developed countries. Commendable efforts have been ongoing in some individual African countries, and in May, 6 African countries, Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, Egypt, Morocco, and Mauritania, formally launched the African Green Hydrogen Alliance and has invited others to join in making the continent a global frontrunner. Now, why this move is important for many reasons. One is tempted to ask, isn't the global frontrunner goal overly ambitious considering our own needs in the continent? Well, the International Renewable Energy Agency does not think so. In a recent report, it says the continent has one of the world's biggest potentials for producing hydrogen from low-cost renewable electricity. The report further foresees Africa producing 80% of the new power generation it needs from solar, wind, hydropower, and other renewable energies by the year 2030. The potential, I must say, sounds great. But can we surmount the obvious challenges considering the limited availability of the required infrastructure for green hydrogen production versus the already huge investments in large fossil reserves and the needed political will? Can we? For some perspective on these and the prospect for Africa's energy sector, the founder of Integrated Africa Power, IAP, Bonn, Germany, Chigozie Nweke-Eze, joins me on one slot. He is an economist and a geographer with 12 years of research, consulting, and developmental projects in energy transition in Africa. More recently, his work has focused on the feasibility and implication of hydrogen development in the African continent and the international partnerships thereof. Chigozie, thank you very much for joining us on one slot.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you as well. What is green hydrogen and why do we need it?
Green hydrogen is an energy carrier whereby you split water into its constituents, which is water and oxygen, oxygen and hydrogen. And then you get in a process called electrolysis, and then you use the hydrogen that is gotten out of this, which is clean and green, as the name implies, to then as a source of energy to power all sorts of things.
The idea, if I understand, is a sustainable energy source. But I read somewhere that hydrogen is not a primary energy source. Can you explain this, please?
It's not a primary energy source. I mean, hydrogen is an energy carrier. It's an energy vector.
Okay.
I mean, an energy source, a primary energy source, would be energy from the sun, for instance, solar energy, energy from the wind energy. But in the case of production of hydrogen, you would need to actually use energy from the sun or the wind or hydropower to conduct the process I've just described called electrolysis, in order to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. It is the constituent hydrogen that is then used as an energy vector to power all sorts of things.
All right, this whole conversation is about the prospects for green hydrogen to transform Africa's energy. So I'm going to just get right to it. Please tell us, what are some of these prospects that is being touted that will transform our energy sector?
Yeah, if you come to a continent like Africa, you find the availability of huge renewable energy resources, namely solar energy, namely wind energy, namely hydropower, geothermal, so all sorts of renewable energy resources, which comes in handy in the production of green hydrogen. So because of the availability of these resources in large quantities, African countries come up in the first list as countries with huge potentials for production of green hydrogen in a cost competitive manner because of the huge availability of these resources. And so that is why Africa is always being mentioned when you talk of green hydrogen.
Okay. How, except maybe I missed it, how really is it going to transform the energy sector for Africa?
Okay. Well, I feel that it is left for individual countries in Africa to decide this question, to define how it would be useful for them, or how they can use this new trend called green hydrogen to transform their own energy sector. This is why every country, some countries are already doing it, others have not yet started it. The countries sit down to define what they call green hydrogen strategies. It's in these green hydrogen strategies or plans that they define in which specific ways they plan to pursue green hydrogen and in which ways they hope that their pursuit of green hydrogen would transform their own energy sector. One idea that comes to mind, the pursuit of green hydrogen in one hand is also a way to actually increase the availability of renewable energy projects in a country, because I've just told you that before you can produce green hydrogen, you need green hydrogen, renewable energy projects that would be able to power the electrolysis process. So some countries has envisioned that, okay, fine, if we want to produce green hydrogen, or pursuing green hydrogen is also a way of attracting investment in the renewable energy sector, which would also enhance the energy sector of the country as a whole. That's one part to look at it. Another part to look at it is that we have to know that green hydrogen is also quite useful in decarbonizing areas we call hard to abate sectors. There are products of green hydrogen, in this case, green ammonia. You could produce green ammonia, which could be used to produce green fertilizers, which can also be exported. So there are also products that are directly related to green hydrogen process, which can also either be used within the country or exported for export revenues. So these are some of the ways we can use green hydrogen. One more way we can use green hydrogen to transform the energy landscape is actually to use it as a tool to stabilize the intermittent renewable energy sources. That is to say that you could use it to store excess generated electricity from solar panels or wind, for instance, in form of ammonia or green ammonia that can then be used again such that you do not have any waste of energy resources.
Okay, can you, because I'm sure for a lot of people, I had a tough time trying to understand the whole framework of this. I still don't have much of a clue. So I want you to give us an example, if you may, of a country that in Africa that is doing something with renewable energy, hydrogen carbon in this case, that, I beg your pardon, green hydrogen, that you think is an example of the potentials that we will get if we explore further?
There are a number of countries that are pursuing this in different ways. I will give you some examples. So one, you have a country, for instance, like Morocco, which is currently experimenting on producing green ammonia using green hydrogen. Is a green hydrogen derivative for local use and also for export. An experiment was recently carried out in Uganda, whereby they tried to store excess generated electricity from solar panels. They tried to store it using hydrogen as well. And if you want to look at more large-scale examples, then you find countries like Namibia, which as we speak is collaborating with private sector to develop a $10 billion US project, which is expected to generate electricity within the country and also export to European countries.
Okay, I needed to get that clear. I'm sure a lot of viewers will also try to understand from that perspective as well, so we don't get lost in the one magic wand fantasy. There are questions about its use in other areas aside from energy, like aviation. What can it not be used for?
Yeah, there are currently a lot of experiments going on the feasibility of applications of hydrogen technologies. Some areas have been identified as high priority areas that it could be used for. For instance, we know that it can comfortably be used to decarbonize steel industries, or it can be used to produce green ammonia, can be used to produce green methanol, or green methane, or jet fuels, you see. So these are feasible usages. There are also usages that are not so feasible, because of cost. We have to also understand that the electrolysis processes itself at this current time and stage is costly.
Okay.
And is depending on support from governments, many located in Europe and other developed countries, to be able to sustain its pilot stages. And of course, you have a lot of support going on because green hydrogen is being termed. We have to, first of all, understand how green hydrogen emerged. First of all, hydrogen itself is not a new thing. It has always been there. I mean, hydrogen has been used in the oil sector. Green hydrogen has also been experimented before, but it became a topic as a result of people trying to think about how they could further the agenda of energy transition. And they realized that there are sectors that were very difficult to transform. These are called hard to abate sectors. So green hydrogen came up as a means of also decarbonizing certain sectors. For instance, heavy industries like the production of cement, production of steel, you couldn't say that you want to power that efficiently with solar panels and so on. You needed energy vectors like hydrogen to be able to power that, green hydrogen.
Okay.
So that's how green hydrogen came up.
Okay, so green energy is looking like a really good option for a sustainable energy source. But how acceptable is the need for the shift? Should being a global exporter be at the forefront of the agenda for Africa, or we should focus our efforts on sustainability for the interim? What are the challenges to actualization? Please join us after this break for Chigozie's response. Thank you for staying with us. We're still looking at green hydrogen and the prospects for Africa. And my guest is still with us, Chigozie Nweke-Eze. Chigozie, let's talk about the assessment of the level of acceptance on the needs to tap into the opportunities of green hydrogen for energy and, of course, the other benefits for the economy in Africa. What's your assessment?
My assessment is, of course, once you pursue green hydrogen in a meaningful way, which of course starts with making a plan to see how it is feasible in a particular economy. And of course, it has its advantage that it can create jobs. it can add.
Okay, I think maybe you didn't get my question. I'm actually trying to find out if, your assessment of the acceptance of the need to transition to this green energy.
Yeah, green hydrogen. For me, I think that we have to get it clear. According to the predictions that have been done so far, published by IRENA, we know that by 2050, there should be a decline in importation of oil. And so many countries who are dependent in the exportation of oil and gas for oil particularly, especially for as their major part of revenue, would have to find a way to, we have to think again on what to do to survive this period or after this period. So many countries, especially oil producing countries, at this phase are trying to diversify their energy portfolio, trying to, by so doing, go into new technologies, be able to be well prepared for energy futures.
Yeah, but some African countries have invested heavily already in large fossil reserves. And we know that there are hesitants. Some analysts like yourself suggest that there is an unwillingness to invest in a new technology that many say has not been fully tested. What's your point of view on this?
I think it's an investment that one has to think carefully about this. That's why I always emphasize feasibility. One has to think carefully about this, but we have to know, for instance, with technologies like hydrogen, countries that have already made advances in oil and gas can easily transition into hydrogen because they are all gases, right? Mm-hmm. So such that you may have situations whereby you could remodel or utilize existing gas infrastructures.
Is it possible really to transition if you're doing the other kinds of hydrogen, the thicker oils and stuff, to transfer the use of such infrastructure to hydrogen, green hydrogen?
There's a lot of research going on right now, for instance, to see the possibility of using gas pipelines to also transport or to remodel them in such a way that they can also transport hydrogen, right? So it's all on research, but we know that such kind of things could be feasible in the near future, thereby giving an edge to countries that have already invested in gas infrastructures to pursue hydrogen. I will give you an example. For instance, you know about the West African gas pipeline, or also the Moroccan Nigerian gas pipeline that is also being built, that is meant to export gas to Europe. So that particular pipeline can also be built in such a way that it could, in the future, also be able to export produced green hydrogen to Europe.
So if there is so much enthusiasm as to the potentials that there is, but there is no certainty about how we can transition some of the infrastructure that we have, doesn't that mean that the investment requirement might be too much for African governments to be willing to invest in this new energy source despite its potential?
Yeah, I agree with you, but in the cases that I've just mentioned, for instance, in Namibia, where you see large-scale investments in green hydrogen, those investments are not made by African governments. They're actually made by foreign investors. So the $10 billion US I was mentioning that was invested in the project that is currently going on in Namibia, it's actually involving, it's a partnership between a German and a UK firm, and they are investing about $10 million US, roughly about the amount of GDP of the whole country of Namibia in the project. So you see that at this stage there are, of course, it may be difficult for African countries because of the size of their public budget to do so. But how do African countries also position themselves to receive foreign direct investments for such kind of investment? Receive foreign direct.
There's a lot of partnerships going on, like you rightly know, Germany, Namibia, South Africa, Morocco, and the likes. There is a lot of partnership going on when it comes to the green hydrogen production mechanism. But there is also suspicions around the kind of partnership and what Africa is going to get from it. We'll get to that hopefully in the course of this conversation. But let's circle back to the place of water. I particularly brought up this question because we have a scarcity of the resources across Africa. Some countries like Sudan have the situation with droughts. It is a reality now. Only 24% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa has access to safe drinking water. This is not my figure, it's from the UN. You yourself, in another interview, did say that there is a need to be sure that water sources for green hydrogen production does not compete in any way with the uses of fresh water. So how do we walk around this? Where is water is essential to, I know there are other ways, but water is also essential to the process, isn't it?
Yeah, so that is why I said African countries must understand what green hydrogen is. They must also have their own stance and conditions for any investment that will come in as regards green hydrogen. Green hydrogen has its benefits, but it has its own risks. It has its opportunities and it has its risks. So in some African countries, as you just mentioned, they have scarcity of water. The question that the interested government could ask is, if you want to bring in green hydrogen investment in this context, how do you want to make sure that we do not compete with water for drinking, water for agriculture, and so on? There are so many ways to avoid it. For instance, you have cases whereby water can be sourced from the sea. Instead of from freshwater sources, it can be sourced from the sea and then desalinated using the desalination technology. And then, because you need fresh water to produce hydrogen, right? So it has to be fresh water. So if the investor would introduce a new technology for desalination, for production of fresh water, not just for the project, but also to produce even more water for domestic use in the context of production, you see that green hydrogen production in that sense is also adding to improving development trend in that region. So these are the stances that African countries need to make to say, fine, these are our sustainability criteria, these are our conditions for investment. Do you meet it or not? Of course, water issue is very important. We also need to make sure that it is feasible, that where you have the production of green hydrogen, that you also see improvement in energy access in the country and in the region. If you look at, and I think you also see these trends. I mean, as these sustainability criteria have been discussed and emphasized, investors are also taking note of it, and most of them are also aware of this. Current projects that are going on in the African countries are going on with these criteria in mind.
Okay, we can't go away from the question of investment, so I think we should just stay with it and explore these trends there is. What we've been discussing here obviously requires a whole lot of financial commitment and a whole lot of investment. So individual countries might, yes, they're willing to experiment. They're doing, countries like South Africa, they're doing things. But maybe, is it possible for more strides to be attained with this new alliance that was formed in May? I think it's the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance by 6 countries, and they are hoping that other countries will come in. Do you think that that kind of collaboration will speed up the sourcing for the required funding to diversify and get us into this green hydrogen environment?
Yeah, I think such alliances are welcome and should be encouraged, not just for sourcing financing as a group or as a block. I think that, for sharing best practices of green hydrogen production is also very important. best practices, and also it gives the room for countries to consider collaboration in construction of those projects. You know, for instance, countries that have abundant renewable energy resources but scarce water resources would collaborate with countries that do not have much renewable energy resources but not so much problem with water. And together they could collaborate to make a project happen. And together they could also try to make the risk projects to be able to attract more financing for it. Okay, so it's welcome, such kind of alliances.
I'm sorry to have stopped you, but that alliance, I think one of the goals was to become a global front runner when it comes to hydrogen energy. Should that be a priority at this stage? Should that alliance, if it gets more collaborators to come in, be more focused on how we can grow internally, grow our resources internally, than looking at this stage to be exporters, even though we still have the resources?
Well, we have to also realize that there are benefits with exporting. With exporting certain energy resources, you could earn external revenues, which you can invest in other sectors that would need it. Beyond that, it's also very, very important to not forget development and the development of domestic energy sectors, as you've just mentioned. So that's why a lot of energy planning is needed to find a balance between how much do we need to produce that will benefit us and how much do we also need to export to gain foreign revenues that we could also reinvest in the economy, including in energy sectors.
Okay. You support such alliance is important, but do you think it is the place to start with our efforts to increase our green hydrogen capacity?
Yeah, because as you know, the whole green energy technology, green hydrogen technology is also still undergoing huge research and experiments. And
okay, I think, Chigozie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you froze for a minute. Continue, please.
Okay. I was referring to, you know, the importance of collaborating to share know-how and to understand the technology itself as it advances. You know, because as I said, green hydrogen is a relatively new technology. I mean, the advances that are made so far are new. It's now that people have seen most of the applications and needs. And so there are a lot of research going on. It is important that countries come together to see how they can cooperate, cross-border cooperation in energy development. And it's always welcome. I always support it. And you know, I'll give you an example beyond hydrogen. If you look at huge resources, for instance, hydro resources in DRC, for instance, imagine that such projects was developed, we would have gone a long way to solve energy problem in surrounding countries. But because of lack of efficient cooperation among African countries, that project has stalled. So in order to drive a faster energy development, to de-risk projects to attract more investments, cooperation between countries are always welcome.
Okay. I think it's time for us to take a quick breather. And when we come back, we'll be looking at how Africa can truly deliver on green hydrogen potential. We'll be picking Chigozie's brain a little further. Don't go away, please. Good to know you're still with us. It is One Slaughter News Central Television on your screens now on DSTV 422. We still have Chigozie Nweke-Eze, and we're talking about green hydrogen and the prospects for transforming Africa's energy source. Chigozie, efforts are on, no doubt. You've mentioned some of them already, but how truly can we deliver on Africa's green hydrogen potential? You talked, one of the prospects you mentioned earlier was the storing of electricity. Maybe you could start from there. How can we truly begin to deliver on the potential that we have instead of talking about it consistently?
Yeah, there are a lot of potentials for that. I started to talk about the potentials of green hydrogen to serve as a vector to store excess generated electricity from renewable energy sources or intermittent renewable energy sources like solar and wind. So you can store it there. Of course, you have your batteries as well, which you could use to do so. But hydrogen can also be served that purpose. And then when you store it, you can then reuse it or even transport it for export elsewhere. Other than that, you could use it to decarbonize heavy industries. Because this is an era of energy transition and decarbonization. We have to also try to see how countries could decarbonize, and by so doing, gain what could also be called carbon credits. So these are some of the usages currently, or some of the potentials of each stages. We have to bear in mind that there are countries who traditionally bear the brunt of climate change. And these countries are increasingly taking responsibilities of restoring this by putting a lot of funding for climate mitigation projects. And so what some African countries are doing, as well as other developing countries, they are trying to position themselves to be able to gain some of this funding in order to be able to use it to develop their energy sector as a result. I want to give you an example, for instance, the Kenya's case of geothermal energy production, whereby Kenya was able to attract huge investments for the development of their geothermal projects because they are green projects. They term it green projects. And so when you make your plan and you're able to plan it well, you could get financing for that. And with this financing, you could develop a large-scale renewable energy project which is serving two purposes. Number one, it is generating electricity within the country where the project is located, but at the same time also contributing to climate mitigation process that is currently going on all over the world.
In all of this, we've talked about investment, we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about, some of the things that come, some of the challenges and the prospects of green hydrogen. I want you to tell us what kinds of policy requirements would we need from governments? Because one thing is to say, come and invest, but investors would want to know what kind of climate am I coming to invest in? Is it fair? Does it have fair business practices? So from your years of research, what would you suggest should be some of the key principles in the policies that would be required for such investment that we want come into Africa?
Yeah, I think one first one is to make it easy for investors to invest, private investors to play. You see, there has to be an enabling environment that encourages people to make these kind of investments, foreigners or even locals. There has to be an enabling environment. There has to be some incentives from the government itself. It could come in form of tax breaks for some technologies, come in form of co-investment, provision of land as a co-investor, because we have to know that production of green hydrogen requires large vast of land, not just for the green hydrogen technology itself, but also for wind and solar energy projects that would also be there. So when you see a government that is willing to attract such kind of investments, they come up to say, okay, fine, these are the incentives. It comes up in form of incentives to say, okay, fine, if you're interested, we are willing to give you this resource and that. We're also able to give you tax breaks, something to motivate investors. We're able to secure your investments, risk insurances. So these are some of the tools in the hands of the government to be able to attract more investments in green energy projects.
All right, South Africa and Namibia keeps popping up when we talk about green hydrogen. Some say, I don't know if you agree, that they are the leading countries in Africa. If you agree that they are, what do you think they're doing that should be considered by other countries? But if you don't, that means this question doesn't really apply.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, one could argue that for different reasons. I mean, the two countries are pursuing green hydrogen in two different ways. So while South Africa is pursuing it in form of research, science, and technology, trying to improve their electrolysis technology, they have a mineral, platinum group metals, that is very important for the production of the electrolysis technology. So they're trying to advance on this technology. They're trying to also see the feasibility. They have plans for Green Hydrogen Valley. You see, they're thinking more of domestic use and applications. So this is the difference. While Namibia is developing their green hydrogen project in a more large-scale nature that incorporates export as well.
Okay.
What can be learned from both? I mean, what can be learned is also the way the Namibian government has shown interest and in attracting such kind of investments in their country. The way they were able to create the enabling condition, the way they were able to create trust for such investment to come into their country. The way they have shown enthusiasm, you see, and that can also be emulated.
All right. I'm told we have limited time left on the program, so I'll just go ahead and talk about, we talked about production costs and how we can reduce that and still increase production at the same time. And we talked about partnerships across government and as well as investors. This is key. But there are some concerns about what kind of investment. I couldn't complete this conversation without asking you. I'm sure you've heard the whispers about European plans for hydrogen energy projects like Desert Tech in North Africa. It's being referred to as green colonialism. Is that a real issue, you think, or people are just pulling strings out of the air?
That is why African countries have to also sit up to make sure that no one exploits them. Every country has the responsibility to look out for their own interests. We live in a geopolitical world. And so I think that what happened in Desert Tech was a very clear example that any project that carries on without sufficiently considering the interest of the two parties involved, that those projects can also fail. And I feel that lesson is also taken home in future collaborative projects of that nature. We want to believe that the lessons have been learned from such projects, such that new projects like green hydrogen projects going forward would not fall into such traps. At the same time, African countries has to also be able to make their conditions known, make their stance known, make their interests known, and be able to negotiate properly. And by so doing, and also have laws and rules and be able to enforce them with the right institutions.
Enforcement is key here, because one thing is to say I have policy, I have rules. The other is to actually have the principles to enforce those rules. And that's where political will also comes in. I wish we had more time. I will still stay with that desert tech, because we know that they rebranded. They rebranded to 2.0, they rebranded to 3.0, and people are still concerned as to really what they are up to. But in the interest of time, where do you see Africa's energy sector in, say, another 20 years? Because it requires some time. Should we continue to toe the green hydrogen line?
Yes, I would say yes. We should keep our eyes and ears open, keep our doors open to opportunities while looking carefully to make sure that whatever proposition that comes to the doorstep is additional, in the sense that it improves existing pursuit for energy access, full energy access. It increases existing pursuit for water security. It increases revenues in the country, and that it brings skill transfers and job creation. So we should keep the door open, keep our eyes open, keep our ears open, be willing to collaborate with other African countries in the sense, to the end that it benefits each country.
Thank you very much for speaking with us, Chigozie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, Felicity.
Chigozie Nweke-Eze, he is the founder of Integrated Africa Power. He joined us from Germany. In closing, I'll just say Africa cannot afford to be left behind in the green hydrogen race and then play catch-up with the rest of the world. This is a golden opportunity. That green hydrogen could account for up to 12% of global energy use by 2050 means we must be in line to be leading the rise of new energy superpowers. But most importantly, in my mind, improving access to sustainable clean energy is the key to unlocking a prosperous future for millions of people across Africa. Nelson Mandela did say that it always seems impossible until it is done. Let's tap in. We have what it takes to succeed. As always, thank you very much for watching. I will see you next week. Until then, take care.